Okay, we're going to try and go ahead and start tonight. All right, we'll be in Genesis 17. The internet is a little laggy. Could be the storms in the area. And so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll be in Genesis 17. Tonight, we'll be looking at the sign of the covenant, that is circumcision. And let me get my Bible, the Bible over here. Okay, Genesis 17. We'll just pick up with verse number 9. We looked at verses 1 through 8 last week, and we'll pick up with verse number 9. And the Bible says, "And God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man-child in your generations. He that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man-child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant." Now we're going to try to get through the rest, also make a few comments about the following verses of verse 15 down through, which is very important. But I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that because we will revisit those verses later on when we get to Isaac. Okay, now, last week we looked at the source of the covenant. The source of the covenant is God made a covenant with Abraham. This is the sign of the covenant. So I'm going to read a few things and kind of lay some groundwork on this to help explain what's going on, okay? Now, God tells Abraham that he and his children are going to have to do something. In verse 4, God says, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee." And then he comes to verse number 9, and God said unto Abraham, "Thou shalt keep my covenant." So the idea of this is God is saying in verse 4, "As for me, this is what I'm going to do." Then in verse number 9, "As for you, this is what you will do." Now, although the covenant was unconditional, and I'm going to explain this, there was something that Abraham and his descendants were required to do to receive the blessings of the covenant. Now, God has already promised Abraham 3 things. All right, we've already looked at those 3 things. All right, those promises were not conditional. The promises mentioned in this chapter, verses 1 through 8, are further explanations of the previous promises. God said those last week. We saw the 5 I wills of God. God is going to give this land to Abraham, make him a great nation, and give him a son and seed that will multiply like the stars in heaven and the sand of the earth. He will bless those who bless him and curse those who curse him. But Abraham and his family will have to keep God's covenant. Now, what is interesting is that several of these things have already happened, right? Now, what does unconditional covenant imply? Now, if there are no conditions to the Abrahamic covenant, then why this condition? Now, we must remember what covenants are. They are agreements between 2 or more parties. When a covenant was made, each party had to fulfill certain conditions. The parties had to agree on the conditions. Now, typically, a covenant that was made was established on each party bringing something of equal value to the discussion table. So if there were 2 people involved, 2 parties involved, each party had to bring something of equal value to the table. Now, an unconditional covenant was a covenant that was made with only one party that had to meet the conditions agreed on. Now, there was no one else at the table. In other words, all right, God and Abraham, the only person at the table was God. Now, we know that Abraham was there at the table, but there was nothing that Abraham could bring to the table. The unconditional covenant is simply that Abraham does not have to bring anything to the table. He does not have to offer anything. So when we come to chapter 17, what appears to be a condition is not a condition in the sense of how a covenant works. Abraham could not offer anything in return. Now, we have. I know the internet is freezing really bad for some reason tonight. So those that are watching at home, I apologize for the internet freezing. Even the OBS system is freezing up for some reason. I'm not sure why, but we'll go ahead and teach through it, and hopefully it will pick back. It'll pick back up. But turn to Genesis 23. Genesis 23. I'm not going to. It is really freezing up bad. I am not going to read all 20 of these verses. You know what? I think it may have just kicked me completely out. It might have. Oh, well. If I have to come up here later on and re-record it or something, I'll do that. But Genesis 23, I am not going to read all 20 of these verses. Okay? We're not going to do that. Go back and reread these. But what we have in Genesis 23 is the death of Sarah. Okay? Sarah died. Now, when Sarah died, Abraham needed a place to bury her. Okay? So Abraham goes to a man named Ephron, and he is going to purchase a field to be able to bury Sarah. Okay? Ephron is going to say in verse 13, and he spake unto Ephron in the audience of the people of the land, saying, but if thou wilt give it, I pray thee hear me, I will give thee money for the field. Take it of me, and I'll bury my dead. And Ephron answered Abram, saying unto him, my Lord, hearken unto me, the land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that betwixt me and thee? Bury therefore thy dead. Now, the verses before this, I didn't mean to skip those. Okay. Abraham comes to this man, Ephron, and he says, Ephron, I would like to bury my dead here and purchase the field. Ephron responds and says, Abraham, don't worry about giving me money. You can just have the field. Abraham says, no, you need to tell me how much this field is worth. I'm going to purchase it from you, and then I'm going to bury my dead. Then Ephron says, fine, it's worth this much money. What is that between me and you? Give me the money. Okay, go bury your dead. Now, what we have right here is an example of a conditional covenant. Abraham wanted the land. The man was just going to give him the land, and Abraham said, no, I'm not going to do that. I want this to be like this an official agreement between me and you. When the man said, fine. So what happened? Both of these men, they come to this table of agreement. The man has a cave that Abraham wants to bury his dead. Abraham has money. So they are both offering something of equal value. A cave that is worth 400 shekels of silver, and then the 400 shekels of silver. So now there is a conditional covenant that has been made. Both men are coming into agreement. Okay, now, there is another covenant that we want to look at that God is going to make with Israel. I want you to turn to Exodus 19. Now, Exodus 19 is what is referred to as the Mosaic covenant. Okay, the Mosaic covenant. The Mosaic covenant is a conditional covenant. Okay? Exodus 19, look at verse 15. I'm sorry, verse 5. Exodus 19 and verse 5. He says this, now, therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded them. Now notice this. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. Now notice this. This is a conditional covenant. Conditional. God is bringing something to the table. I will do all of this for you, if you will do all of this for me. And what do the people do? They agree upon this covenant and they say, fine, we will do that. That is a conditional covenant. Notice when the covenant is made, the people are involved in the covenant that is being made. All right, we can turn back to Genesis 17. Now, when God made the covenant with Abraham in chapter 15, Abraham was asleep. Later on, God is going to make a covenant with the people of God, Israel, the Palestinian covenant. And then later on, God is going to make a covenant with David, the Davidic covenant. Those other two covenants are unconditional. Even though the people are there, even though David is there, there is nothing that they have to do at that moment when God makes the promises. But when we read of the Abrahamic covenant, when we read of the Palestinian covenant, and we read of the Davidic covenant, and you could even say the new covenant in Jeremiah, okay, that they're all unconditional. But there were things that the people had to do in order to experience the blessings of those covenants. Now you say, but Brother Dan, how, I don't understand, how can it be unconditional and then God is saying this, adding this to it? No, we're going to explain why God is adding this to this, but we have to remember something about God, that God is righteous. And because God is righteous, if his people are in sin, he cannot bless sinfulness. Okay? So there is that condition on it, okay, of righteousness. But God doing this, there was nothing that Abraham is going to have to do. I'm going to bless you, I'm going to give you a bunch of kids, and I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to make your name great. There's nothing that you can bring to the table, Abraham. There's nothing that you can offer me like you're going to do with Ephron later on that is of equal value or of service to me. There's nothing that you can do. Okay, now, let's get into this thing of this covenant, this sign. Now, in verse number 9, so there's 5 things here that are mentioned that involve this sign of the covenant. Why he says, I want you to do this. All right, again, doesn't negate the unconditionality of this covenant. There's nothing there that Abraham can bring to the table. But what is it that he's doing? So in verse number 9, listen to what he says in verse number 9. Thou shalt keep my covenant. Okay? Therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. Now, I want you to notice this word keep. Now, I want you to consider first the preserving of the covenant. Now, God lays out for Abraham what he needs to do. Now, what is interesting is that Abraham does not question God. Abraham is not like, oh, wait a minute, God. I thought you were just going to unconditionally do all of these things for me. No, Abraham understands that God is going to do all of these things for him. It is an everlasting covenant. It is perpetual. It is going to happen at some point. Okay? Abraham understood the unconditional aspect of this covenant. All right, now this is not something that takes him by surprise. Abraham is to keep the covenant. Listen to what he says. Thou shalt keep my covenant. Abraham, you're to keep this. You're to hold on to this. You are to, and the word keep means to preserve it. You are to watch it. You are to protect my covenant. Okay, Abraham is to keep or preserve this covenant. God is giving it to him, but Abraham is to preserve it or to guard it. Okay, this is what he's supposed to do. All right, secondly, consider the practice of the covenant. Now, what is it that he does? Now, this is my covenant in verse 10, which ye shall keep. between me and you and thy seed after thee. What is it? Here it is. Every man child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. Now, God reveals the practice. It is circumcision. Now, it needs to be remembered and it needs to be understood that circumcision was not a new practice in the days of Abraham. There were other nations that did this. But God chose circumcision because of the meaning and the reflection even in Abraham's day. So other nations, some of the Sumerians, the Phoenicians, some of the Egyptians, some other people a few practice circumcision. So why did God choose it? Because of what circumcision represented in the ancient Near Eastern culture and customs of those days. Now, circumcision in its broadest sense, in that day, in the broadest sense, was an alliance or a dedication with a deity or with another god. Circumcision in that day was practiced for a few different reasons. One of the, I know this isn't on your handout, but one of the reasons was to show an elitism. Okay, it was to show an elitist status. Someone who had a close affiliation with a god, they would circumcise themselves. This relationship brought a distinguished position within the group. Here with Abraham, God was claiming through circumcision that Abraham and his family, this group of people, had a special position with Jehovah. Okay? The nations of the day, ancient Near Eastern practices, the men would circumcise themselves to show they had an elite position with the deity of the day. Jehovah, God, is bringing that to Abraham. Another is the priesthood. Circumcision symbolized priestly appointment in many cultures of that day. This was an initiation into a lifelong service before their God, before their deity. Even to enter the place of worship, the person needed to be circumcised. In the Old Testament, the idea of circumcision with worship is clarified. Even within, of course, they all had to be circumcised, but the Levites had to be circumcised in the law. Okay? Even those who are circumcised, we find out in the Old Testament, if their hearts were not right, God would still judge them. So we know that it goes beyond the physical, even the physical aspect of circumcision. We see that, but in the culture of that day, they would be circumcised to show an elitist position, but also to show this a priesthood position. Another reason why people would be circumcised were because of oaths. It was also a sign of an oath, a commitment to remain faithful even under threat of punishment. Covenants were not made, but covenants were cut in the ancient Near Eastern culture. When Abraham received this sign of circumcision, Abraham was declaring through the circumcision that he would remain faithful to the God who had made this promise with him. So through the circumcision, he is declaring an oath, I will remain faithful to you. Okay? And then the fourth reason of circumcision was the body of the man. Circumcision was made on a very important part of the male body. All right? It was associated with reproduction, which is representative of life and life to follow. It was a sign of future commitment to the God of the covenant. And I'm going to go ahead and say this now. Notice as we read this, it's the responsibility of the parent to circumcise the child. And later on, we'll see if the child was not circumcised, that later on, that man would be cut off from the people. Okay? Now, all of these reasons reflect why God chose circumcision. We're going to see this in a few moments. Okay, well, remember in verse number 8, what does God say? And I will be their God. I will be your God, Abraham, and I will be their God. God has claimed that Abraham and his descendants will be his people, and he will be their God. So this keeping of the covenant, this practice of circumcision, okay, is how they show that they are God's people. So there is confusion, like baptism, circumcision, and things like that. There's this misunderstanding of baptism teaching that came later on in the church. But like, we are baptized, okay, to show that we're obeying Christ. Okay, Father, that's the idea of the circumcision. They are circumcising their children, to say, they are saying, they're saying to Jehovah, you are my God and I am your person. My child is claiming you as their God, and you are their God. This is how they show they are God's people. Even those who are not true Hebrews, later on, those who are slaves, those who are strangers, if they're going to be in the fold of God, they're going to be a part of this covenant and receive the blessings that are associated with Abraham, they are to be circumcised as well. So the practice deals with the removing of the foreskin of the male anatomy. We come to verse number 11. All right, what is the purpose of this covenant? What is the purpose of the circumcision? So we come to verse number 11. Listen to what he says in verse 11. And ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token. Here it is. Now we've already mentioned, okay, it's that they're saying, God, you are our God, and we are your people, but it shall be a token of the covenant. Now, what is the purpose? Now, the purpose of this aspect of the covenant was to be a token of the covenant between God and Abraham. Now, the word token means sign, and it carries the idea of a testimony. It is a mark that points to a relationship or specific event. The circumcision was a sign that they were the people of God. Okay? The purpose of the circumcision was twofold. The first was to be a sign to God that they were in covenant with Him. This is an issue of faith. The covenant was unconditional, but it was based on faith. Okay? God, so if I was a Jew and my son is born, on the 8th day I would have him circumcised. Why? Because through that circumcision, the purpose of the circumcision was an act of my faith. I was declaring that I believed that God was going to bless us, curse those that defrauded us and defamed us, give us the land, make us a great people, do all of these wonderful things for us, and I am demonstrating my faith in that by circumcising my son on the 8th day. That was the purpose, to be a token, to be a sign, to be a testimony that I believed in what God was going to do. But another purpose of this mark was to signify their participation in God's covenant with Abraham. It was an outward confirmation that they belonged to the covenant people of God. Now, obviously, this part of the male body is covered. No one sees this, right? Other nations don't see this. Other people are not going to see that it is covered, okay? But because it was on an outward part of the body, it is an outward confirmation that they belong to the covenant people of God. God used circumcision as a way to sort out those who were a part of the covenant nation and those who would be excluded. So the reason why God is giving them this, it is to separate them from everyone else. It is to even though other nations we know did this and practiced it, God is coming to Abraham and he says, I want you to do this as a token, as a sign, as a mark, as a testimony that you believe that I'm going to fulfill this covenant and to show that you belong to me, to separate everyone else out. Okay, you are of elite status. You're going to, you're going to be this priesthood, all of these wonderful things. You know what the practice of circumcision is from all around you. You understand this. But the purpose for me and you, Abraham, there's nothing that you can bring to the table. There's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can offer. But I want you to practice this covenant of circumcision. And I want you to do this as a demonstration of your faith. Okay? But what is the placement of this covenant? Now notice this. Why at this point? Why is God telling Abraham what he needs to do now, right? Why this requirement? Now, the reason seems to be that this is the first time that God is declaring that he will be their God and they will be his people. Now, if you go back to verse number 9, and God said unto Abraham, verse 8, and I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. This is the first time that God says this statement, I will be their God. He doesn't say it to Abraham or anything like that. He just says, I will be their God. This is the first time that God is making this statement. And then as soon as he makes the statement, I will be their God, then he comes and he says, Abraham, this is what I want you to do. This is the sign. You will keep my covenant. You will protect it. You will guard it. You will keep it close. It will be a part of who you are. And this is what you will do. This is the sign. This is the token. Okay? Again, in the ancient Near East, this was a practice. The people would dedicate themselves to their God, and they would do something that signified it. This sign was about telling themselves and others that they belonged to Jehovah. This is why God is giving this sign to Abraham at this point, because God is setting himself apart to be their God. He's already claimed, Abraham, I'm going to do all of these things for you. I'm going to do this, do all of this. But Abraham, I will be the God of these people. Okay? This is what I want you to do. This is why God is introducing this now. And then I'll read verse 12 through 13. He gives some information about this. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. Very interesting. 8 days is when the clotting process is at its strongest. Okay. There are some possible other health benefits along with the circumcision. Okay. Because there's this idea that this was barbaric and different things like that, and it's not. This is not a science class, so I don't want to go into that. But 8 days, the highest point of clotting is taking place at this time. Every man-child in your generations, he that is born in your house, so everyone that is born to you, or bought with money of any stranger, all right, that would be slaves, that would be people that you conquer, which is not of thy seed. Okay, you have strangers in your house, and that you purchased. They also have to be circumcised. Verse 13, he that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. All right, this is something that is to be everlasting. When we get into Galatians, and we get into the New Testament, okay, when Abraham is, or when Paul is talking about circumcision and things like that, it is usually talking about the law and not the aspect of the Abrahamic covenant. Okay? Should Jews still practice this? If they believe in Jehovah, I believe that they will. Okay? But most of them, a lot of them don't believe in Jehovah, so they're not, because they don't believe in the covenant. They don't think it's going to happen. This is going to be fulfilled one day, all of this in the millennium. Okay? But notice the punishment of the covenant. Verse 14. And the uncircumcised man-child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. Now, all through the Old Testament, we read about God bringing his people back to the land. Even when they are in complete sin, God reminds them of the Abrahamic covenant. But this aspect of the covenant, though, seems to be unforgivable. Okay? And what I mean by unforgivable is that even when they're in ruin and God is scattering them, he's like, I'm going to bring you back, right? But he's like, if they are not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off. Well, it implies they can circumcise themselves and not be cut off, right? Okay. They must circumcise themselves to enjoy the blessings of this covenant. God says that the one who is not circumcised is to be cut off from his people. Now, there are many different ideas behind this phrase. But in this case, many believe that this is a physical death. I'm not going to get into how they're going to know, how they're going to check, how they're going to find out. Okay? It may be this is divine judgment from God. God knows who is not circumcised, just like he knows who is worshiping false idols in secret, when nobody else knows about it, right? But he tells them they are to be cut off, okay, because he's broken the covenant. Now, why is he being cut off? Because of what the purpose of the covenant is for. It is a sign of faith. It is a sign that they believe that God is going to do this. So when a father does not circumcise his child, that father is confessing, I do not believe in these promises. I do not believe in this. When the man-child, notice the man-child whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, we don't know at what point, but at some point the child is going to become a man and he can decide to be circumcised. If he says, no, I don't want to be circumcised, he himself is declaring, I don't believe in these covenants. I don't believe in this promise. No faith in Jehovah. Now the reason is that this aspect of the covenant again revealed the faith of the people. They were showing their faith and obedience to God. God has claimed them as his people. They're claiming God as their God. In the Old Testament, God reminds his people that he will bring them back to the land. He will bless them and he will make them great. And he will do all of that. But God wants his people to associate themselves with him. What is interesting again is that the parents were to do this for their sons. So the blessing of the children was contingent on the faith of the parent. Now, what about the daughters, right? It seems that the daughters would be classified in the covenant through their father's circumcision, as though the daughters themselves would just be received into the covenant, okay? That they would be a part of this. There's nothing for the daughters to do, okay? What is interesting is when Moses is returning to go rescue Israel out of the promised land, that Moses did not circumcise his two boys. And that Zipporah takes a knife, and it appears that something is actually wrong with Moses, that Moses may be sick and cannot physically perform the act of circumcision on his two children, that Zipporah performs the act of circumcision on his children, and the angel of the Lord was going to kill the boys of Moses. But when Zipporah circumcises the two boys, then God spares them. Why was he going to do that? Well, because Moses was about to enter into the deliverance of Israel, and he wasn't right with God in his standing. His children were not. So God was very serious about maintaining this aspect of the covenant. Okay? So again, the covenant is unconditional, like the Davidic covenant is unconditional, and the Palestinian covenant is unconditional. And the new covenant is unconditional. But within the Davidic covenant, if David's children, the kings, sinned, they would be punished. And they would not have a man to sit on that throne. Okay? We know that it will be fulfilled through Christ. All right? The sinless one. Okay? But it was still, even though it was unconditional, there was an aspect of the covenant that had to be fulfilled. Okay? And again, I hope that we explained it at the beginning with the two examples from the Word of God that express that. Now, I want you to consider the specifics of this covenant. Now, I'm not going to go because we get into Ishmael. Okay? In verse 15 and 16, we have the changing of Sarah. Verse 15 says, God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. The changing of Sarah's name. Sarah means princess. This is revealing within the context that kings and nations will come from her, just as God told Eve that her seed would battle the serpent. God is showing who He will use. He will use the woman Sarah to bring about the promised seed. And I know that Genesis 3:15, the seed of the woman is a reference to the virgin birth, and I know that, but it's very interesting that God is separating Sarah here, blessing Sarah. I will bless her. I'm going to give her a son through her. I'm going to make her a mother of nations. Okay? Just that connection, the kingdom connection here. But then we come to verse 17 and 19, and we have the covenant seed. God tells Abraham that Sarah will be the one who gives birth to a son. Look at verse number 17. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed. Now God is standing in front of him. He falls down and he laughs and said in his heart. So he doesn't say it out loud. He says this in his heart. Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And then Abraham said unto God. So he says one thing in his heart. He laughs. He falls down. He says to himself, God, really? I'm 100, dude. You think I'm 100 and she's 90. Are you kidding me? So then he says out loud, oh God, oh that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. Now we find out later on why God calls him Isaac. Isaac means laughter. Abraham and Sarah's going to laugh in the next chapter. But Abraham and Sarah both laugh at this. And God says, you know you're going to call your son? You're going to call him Isaac, which means laughter. So that every time you call him, hey, Isaac, you're going to be reminded, you laughed at me, and I did it, right? Thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant. There it is again, everlasting covenant. And with his seed after him. So look at verse number 19. The son is called. God tells Abraham that he will have a son and will call him Isaac. Isaac's name means laughter. God is calling him Isaac because of the laughter of Abraham and the laughter of Sarah that will come later. It is possible that Abraham did not tell Sarah about this visitation. Okay, it is possible because later on when Jehovah shows up and says it, Sarah's on the other side of the tent and she laughs. And God's like, yeah, no, this time next year it's going to happen. If you look at verse 21, he says it. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this said time in the next year. I'm already telling you when it's going to happen. So the son is called Isaac, but then notice verse number 19, the son of the covenant. Now, verse number 19, thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. Look at verse 20. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this said time in the next year. And he left off talking with him. God went up from Abraham. So the son of the covenant. So who is the son of the covenant? Isaac. Not Ishmael, but Isaac. Okay, and later on, Paul is going to quote this later on in the New Testament. Okay, but with Isaac shall thy seed be called. All right, in Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says this: with Isaac shall thy seed be called. Okay, so this is very physical. All right, this is not spiritual. Later on, we know that Christ, is the fulfillment of that seed. I have no problem with that. We know that. Okay, is the full fulfillment of that. But Paul tells us the full fulfillment of Christ is that, the entire world would be blessed. That was a Gentile promise, okay? A promise made to the Gentiles that Christ would be the fulfillment through that, okay? Very, very important, all right? And so, but there we go. That is the sign of the covenant, circumcision. Okay, what was Abraham to do? To preserve this covenant. He was to protect it, guard it. Okay, he is to hold it close to him. Don't forget about it. All right, the practice of it. God is looking at all the other nations that practice circumcision. Abraham would have understood some of these practices, and so God is correlating with that. Abraham, your people will be of elite status. Abraham, you're going to be a priesthood. Later on, what happens? God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and what does Abraham do? He acts as a priest. He advocates for Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, another purpose of it is to be the oaths. Okay, what does God say that Abraham's going to do? In chapter number 19, God says that Abraham, I know Abraham, he will be faithful. He will make sure that his family follows me. That's a part of this oath, a part of this circumcision, what it means. Okay, and then the part that it deals with the male reproductive aspect, future generations. But what was the purpose of the covenant? It was a token. It was a sign. It was a demonstration of their faith. I believe that God's going to fulfill this covenant. God's going to fulfill this promise. That's what it was all about. We are saying that we are a part of the covenant people of God. That's the purpose of this. We belong to Jehovah, and Jehovah belongs to us. Why did God give the covenant here? Because he says in verse number 8, I will be their God. He's making this promise to them, and so he makes this sign right here to Abraham. The punishment is if you do not fulfill this, you will be removed from this covenant. You'll be removed from the blessing. In the specifics of the covenant, it will be that Sarah will give birth to a son. Her name is going to be changed, and the covenant is going to be with a son, with a boy named Isaac. And specifically, Isaac is going to be the one that I will make this covenant with. Okay, and there's one more aspect of the Abrahamic covenant that we're going to see in Genesis 22, in the weeks in next week or whatever. And but that is that. Okay, and so if you know of anyone that tried to watch the video, I'm going to upload this video. It recorded. I'm going to upload it to YouTube so it can be watched a little bit later on. But thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for those that will see this. I hope that you learned something, hope that you understand a little more about the circumcision. Okay, circumcision does nothing for our faith now. It means nothing, right? Okay, especially for Gentiles. And it doesn't mean anything for Jews, for the Hebrews, when it comes to salvation in Christ. Okay? And many of them may practice it to demonstrate their faith that we believe God, that Jehovah is going to fulfill this. Which I think is very interesting. That even Paul, in the book of Acts, goes to Jerusalem to perform a vow. It was a sacrifice. Even though the sacrificial system was done over, and Abraham knew that it was a part of being a Jew. Very, very interesting to me. So, but we will pray, be dismissed. See everyone on Sunday. Hope that you understand the passage.